Awesome. All right, so back. So now we're moving on to lesson 5. It should say lesson 5, not lesson 4. So let's get right into it. First thing we're gonna do today is a quick recap. So this time we're gonna do something different. I want you guys to talk in groups for at least a minute or two, and just discuss what you guys remember from last week. If you want to take your notes, it's fine, but just discuss that. Remember the two main things or three main things that you remember from last week, and then talk about it for within yourselves for 2 minutes. All right. So go ahead. Let's go.
Open heart surgery. Open heart surgery. I think that's one more victim. He said right. I wasn't gonna see that. Oh, have you seen it? It's so fire, bro. I didn't think I would like it. I didn't think I would like it. I thought it was gonna be like my parents described it as one of their favorites. So I was like, yeah. I like remember watching the old one growing up. They remade it. Yeah. So it was like, what? The last. That's what we did. And then there's a
All right, guys, let's get back.
guys.
All right, come back. Good discussion. Ready? Okay. So Sakine, I need you to help me out over here. I need you to pick 2 random people, one from the brothers and one from the sisters, and just tell me 1 or 2 things that you guys talked about, some main points that you remember.
Okay, Savik.
Basically, what happened? Open heart surgery, where it's like,
Very interesting. Nice. You got the sound effects down.
Anyone from the girls want to volunteer themselves? Aisha, since you're shaking your head, no.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, we learned about like Surah Field. Yeah, we learned about Surah Field. And
Awesome.
how the elephant stops walking.
Exactly. Good. Awesome. Yeah, those are 2 important points. So that's a good recap. Other things that we mentioned last week was the story of Bahira, the monk, and how the Prophet ﷺ, he went on a trade caravan, and basically this monk knew that this Prophet ﷺ was going to be a prophet. And so it's a very important story. So yeah, we talked about Surah Fil, the elephants that stopped on their way to Mecca, and we also talked about the splitting of the chest when the Prophet ﷺ was younger. So good job, guys. I remember you had 2 good questions from last lesson, so let's go over those really quickly. So these questions were on the story of the monk and the splitting of the chest. So first one was the question about Bahir the monk and whether or not the story is actually real or not. If there's like a controversy around it. So just to answer this, the story is corroborated in many of the main sources for Sirah literature. So it's in three main sources. And just to kind of understand, okay, how do we know what we really know about the Sirah? Where are we getting this information from? So about 150 years after the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina, so let's say 100 years and more after his death, a scholar basically took all the narrations, so all the stories that were spreading around people, all the memories that people had that they passed on from generation to generation. This scholar, he compiled those together and he put those in one of his books. And so what he basically did was, regardless of if the story was true, like highly authentic, or maybe there was just one person who said that, this story happened and you can't really trust this person, regardless of those two things, as long as there was a narration to the story, then that was put in his book. Because at this time, they wanted to compile everything and save as much stories and save as much information as they could about the Sirah. And the reason for this is because in the early times of Islam, there was mostly oral transfer of knowledge. So today, like we have writing down, we have PowerPoints even, you guys can read these words. Back then, knowledge was basically spread by word of mouth. So oral traditions, there wasn't as much writing done as much formally as it is today. So this is why it took a bit of time to compile all these stories into books. But nevertheless, that's what happened. And then as time went on, more scholars continued to refine these stories, pick out the ones that are really weak and keep the ones that, are strong and we know they're true. And so as we kept on going and going, more scholars, like for example, an important scholar, his name is Ibn Hisham. You guys don't have to remember that, but it's just a name to kind of be familiar with because he's one of the main sources for Sirah. And what he did was he took this first book and he just said, okay, what are the weak stories? I'm going to take those out. And what are the authentic, really strong stories that we know are true based on the chain of transmission? So that's how these stories come about. And that's how we know what we know about the Sirah. And as we continue to go along, more scholars start to refine this science. And so we have, some of our books today, like for example, I'm reading this book here. This is one of the books that I studied in my class, which is a very, very contemporary scholar. And basically, most of the stories in this book, because of how refined and how much process there's been in confirming these stories, most of these stories are 100% authentic. So if you guys want to read the Sirah by yourselves, after this class is done, you're just reflecting on the class, then there's many books that you can use. Even this one, this one's a great book to start with. It's just called Muhammad. So yeah, and then another thing about the story, so we know it's true, is because if you actually go to Jordan, where current day Jordan, where this event took place, this tree that the Prophet ﷺ sat under when he was in this area, it's still there. So the government has made this a place and they've, fenced off and made boundaries and they've put a sign there and it's like a place of visitation now. So we know this place actually exists. We can physically see it with our own eyes. So that's basically what I have to say about the story. We know it's authentic. And next one was, so we're not here yet. The next question we had was about the splitting of the chest, if I'm correct. I think one of the sisters asked if the Prophet ﷺ felt pain or not, right? I think that was a question. So about this, there's when the Prophet ﷺ's chest was split, it wasn't split with a knife or with scissors, like normally we do in open heart surgery, but the angels were actually splitting his chest. So the angels didn't use scissors, they used light. And so just imagine you take like a laser pointer, and for example, just pretend this is a laser pointer. Okay, this is not a laser pointer, this is a pen. But if this is a laser pointer and I point it at the camera, is it gonna hurt you guys? It's just gonna be a light, right? But if somebody comes and takes a scissor and then starts, obviously it's gonna hurt. So we know then that because it was like it was light that he was cut with, it didn't really hurt, and it wouldn't make sense. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not hurt a baby in this manner. So that's what we know, and that's basically what we know from the scholars that narrate these stories. And an interesting thing, as I was reflecting on this, there's a really nice connection that we learn from the story of the splitting of the chest. There's one story that I think many of us know, and it's very similar to the fact that there was a baby and he was going to be sacrificed, and basically the sacrifice didn't happen. So we all know this is the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam. And it's so interesting that there's a connection. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself had that experience to him, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is from the same lineage as Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. And another part of the story, Prophet Ibrahim, he starts in Mecca. He's the one who built the Kaaba first, and he makes a dua to Allah to make this city a blessed city, to bring people to the city, because it was a desert at the time it was made. There was nothing there, no vegetation, no water. Zamzam was there, but he makes a dua, and he says, "Oh Allah, bring people to this city and provide this city with fruits and with beautiful blessings." And he also makes a dua after that. He says, "Oh Allah, bring from these people a messenger who will actually teach them, who will guide them, who will purify them." And as we go along the lines of history, we see that Prophet Ibrahim, who started in Mecca, and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who comes later, he ends the message in Mecca, which is just it's phenomenal. It's a beautiful connection. And it's the same message. He's basically the father, the Abrahamic religions, right? We have this term. So he's the father. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Khatimul Anbiya, the closer, the seal, in the same place. So it was just something that I was thinking about. I wanted to share with you guys. So, and then one more thing that we talked about was Halima, the Prophet ﷺ's basically breastfeeding mother. And I was just thinking about this again, the story, and there's a lesson that I thought would be nice to share that I didn't go over last time. We mentioned that her donkey, which was the means of transport she used to get to the city, it was very slow. So she was basically last in finding a child, and she almost came back to her countryside without a child. But the lesson we learned from this is that things happen for a reason, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan is ordained for each and every one of us for a reason. So if I'm Halima, for example, and I say, listen, I need to get food, I need to get water, I need to get money so I can, live well this next kind of year. And my donkey is so slow, I'm going to miss out all opportunity. I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be like upset. Like, why can't I have a better car, a better donkey, a better means of transport? Because I'm just going to miss out. But she was last. She got the very last child, and it was almost as if she would not get any wage because the child's family was poor. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave her the biggest blessing, and that was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because as soon as that child came in her possession, her animals started going fast. She had a lot of milk to feed her babies, and every time her animals went to graze, they came back with a lot of food. They were just energized, and this is a miracle. So, what lesson lies in here for us in this story is that sometimes we want things, but they may not be beneficial for us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might know something, and He might keep it away from us because that is better for us. So we have to trust in Allah's plan. Trust in Allah's plan and be patient whenever things come up that just seem to be very difficult for you to handle. So that's what I learned from this. I thought it was a beautiful story. So now let's move on to our topic for today. And sorry?
There's a question.
Question.
When basically checking the story is authentic, basically give the scholars an opportunity to try and change it, because if they don't get caught trying to change it, for example, right? And they would do it, right? Because how do you know that they were honest enough to actually really check if it's authentic, or just change it? How do you know?
So who is trying to change what? First clarify that.
Right? Because there's okay. This is the sila, right?
Mhm.
This is the scholar, right? They're checking if it's authentic or not, right? How do you know they're not corrupt scholars who are just trying to change it and say,
Well, you can't. So when you're looking at history, first of all, look at who we're talking about. We're talking about the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Who in their right mind would try to corrupt a story about the one person who brought the Quran to us and who guided us in all of our lessons in all of our life today? Who in their right mind would try to corrupt this? And second of all, it's not only one scholar that's working on these lessons. It's thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of scholars. And so the fact that we have it today, it shows that it's been mass transmitted. There's a term, if you guys ever take if you guys are ever interested in learning about hadith, which is the science of how we know what the Prophet ﷺ told us, all of his sayings, all of his teachings, there's a term, it's called mutawatir in Arabic. If I could type it for you, I would, but I don't know if I'll be able to right now. Mutawatir, which means mass transmitted. And when something becomes mutawatir, first of all, it's very hard for it to become mutawatir. And second of all, when it does, it is almost 100% true. It is 100% true that it is authentic, because you cannot have, let's say 100, let's take this room, for example, right? I tell you guys a fact. I say, listen, I've been to India. I know it exists. And then each and every one of you guys, let's say there's 30 or 40 people in here. You guys go out to your families and you tell your parents, you tell your siblings that, listen, Faraz said that India exists. And he said he's been there. So being your sibling, how do I know that I can trust you that I've said that India exists and then therefore India does exist? There's a lot of things that go into this. First of all, I would trust my sibling because the reputation to me is that they don't lie to me. They've always told me the truth over and over and over again. And I can corroborate this by actually seeing that what they're saying is right. And then you go back to, okay, I told you guys that India exists and I've been there. Why would I lie about that? There's thousands, millions of people that go to India and they've seen it and therefore they know it's true. And they tell people that India is true. So this is mass transmission. All 41 of you guys have said a fact, and that fact can be corroborated by my narrative of me being in India. And so this is mass transmission. Now, if somebody on the outside, he's looking at this fact and says, oh, I don't believe India exists. These guys are all lying. All 40 of them are lying. Is that possible? Is it possible that 40 people could come together and just say, okay, we're going to lie about this thing and we're going to make an entire story up? It's very improbable. So when you have something that's mass transmitted, like the hadiths, like this knowledge that we have about the Prophet ﷺ, like this story, the story of Bahira the monk, that's in many historical traditions and that has been refined over and over again, it is very highly unlikely that somebody corrupted this and made this a lie on purpose. Does that make sense? Am I getting to your question?
yeah,
Okay. So remember that, guys. Remember that. Most of the time, when you read something that has been refined for years and years over and over again with thousands of people corroborating it, making sure it's authentic, then it doesn't make sense for us to say, okay, we can just assume this person was corrupt and it's a lie. It doesn't make sense. So that's the story of Bahira the monk. So let's move on to, did you have another question?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So last week when we were talking about the story of splitting of the chest, what did Amina say when Halima took back the Prophet Muhammad because she was scared? Like, what did Amina say?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what happened was when the Prophet ﷺ came back with Halima, and Halima brought him to her mother. Halima initially, she thought that something bad happened. because she had no idea what exactly happened. Like you just hear a story about, oh, your son was like laid down and then his chest was split and he's all like pale and frightened. So you would think that something bad happened, right? But Amina, she knew that something, it can't be something bad because her experience in the entire pregnancy, she felt no pain. When she was giving birth, there was light emanating out of her womb. Like literally, there was so much light. And when the baby came in, she even heard a voice in her head that said to her to name this baby Muhammad. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So when Halima told Amina the story of what happened, that your son, his chest was split, and all this happened. What she said was, she basically had no fear, no worries. She knew that great things were in store for her son, and because of all this evidence that we just talked about. So she wasn't frightened. She knew that this was definitely not a bad omen or bad occurrence. It could only have been something good in her opinion. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. Any other questions?
Let's talk later. Okay. More questions later. Let's move on.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, let's move on. All right. Now let's get to what we're trying to talk about today. The pact of chivalry. So in Arabic, it's called Hilf al-Fudul. Hilf al-Fudul, the pact of chivalry. And this is a really interesting story in the time of Arab history. So at this time, remember the timeline, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, he went to trade with Abu Talib in Syria, where he met Bahira the monk. And at this time, he's 12 years old. So he's coming back to Mecca. And basically, he's 12 years old. He's at this young age. And what happened is the Arabs at this time, they have a very extraordinary sense of keeping your promise. So honoring your word, like it says on the slide. Truthfulness, honesty, and trust was very, very important in their society. And the Arabs, they hated treachery. So just think about this, right? In that culture, it was like a tribal law system. So think about, you're going on the street, you're in New York City, and you're entering a neighborhood where there's a lot of gangs in play, the laws of the street per se. So you've got one gang is really tight, and they would defend each and every one of their members, even if they're right or wrong. And so, for example, if one gang member comes to another and he just starts fighting with them, and then he kills him, right? Then the other gang would take revenge for this member. Even if there was an altercation and one person was right, one person was wrong, regardless. It's because they have a brotherhood tie, or they have some sort of honor, and they have to avenge this person. So this was kind of what was at play in the Arab society. They didn't have a specific higher court of law, an established justice system. It wasn't really like that. It was more so like tribes, like gangs. If somebody just came and just, he dropped his bags and just started fighting with the other person, then the tribes would come into play. If this person was from a tribe, for example, the tribe of Hashim, and this person was of the tribe outside of Quraysh, then these tribes and their allies would come behind this person, and the other tribe and their allies would come behind that person. So that's kind of how the system, the structure was in place. So at this time, and another thing to mention is the Prophet ﷺ, he's living a solitary life here. And one thing that we kind of don't necessarily think about is the lifestyle and the daily life of the Arabs at that time. So we always hear about, wars going on, the Battle of Uhud, Battle of Badr, this battle and that kind of altercation. But we don't necessarily think about, were they training for war? What were they doing every day? Did they just like live in the desert and then all of a sudden they start fighting and they just go to war? That's not how it works, right? We don't, if any of you guys are playing sports or athletes, you don't go to a match without having training and practice. So the Prophet ﷺ, he was trained in war. And if you guys play sports, who plays sports here? Raise your hand. Let me see all the people that play sports, that even have played sports before. So if you guys know, there's a lot of specific things that go into being a better athlete, like football, for example. If you guys play football, You've got to have full body strength. You've got to be able to push somebody. You have to have an explosive vertical and speed. And even like yoga or martial arts, right? A lot of flexibility. You have to have a lot of precision, strength, and patience. These things take time to build. So the lesson here is the Arabs did practice their war skills. It was use it or lose it. That's how it was seen. So either build the muscles or don't. And the Arabs, they had to basically train because they lived in such a rough society. Somebody could just drop something at one moment and just start fighting, and you have to defend yourself. You have to defend yourself, your family, your tribe, your belongings. So it was very important for all the Arabs to learn these skills, to be very physically fit, to train. It's not like the suburbs, you're in the street, you got to defend yourself. So in Medina, for example, the Sahaba, they practiced archery from Asr to Maghrib. That was their daily routine. And it was at this point, like the Prophet ﷺ, he even said archery was so important to them. He said that whoever learns archery and abandons it, meaning that they don't practice it after, has disobeyed me. So whoever learns archery and abandons it, they've disobeyed me. So that can tell you how important archery was, how important this physical exercise was to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, to the Arabs at that time. So moving along, we have the two uncles, Hamza and Abbas, of the Prophet ﷺ. Something about Hamza was he was a very courageous warrior. He was brave. And he was also very, very related with the Prophet ﷺ in terms that he was his brother by breastfeeding and uncle by lineage. And Abbas was also his uncle. So they made sure, both of them, that the Prophet ﷺ was trained in the arts of war, that he was becoming a strong individual. And if you look at the description of the Prophet ﷺ, everything about his description states that he was a physically fit person. He had, medium height, medium weight. And by medium, it means that he was not excessive in either way. So he's not very lanky. He was not very short, like this guy here. And he had strong hands and feet. So very, very strong stature, broad shoulders. And until the time where he was very old, like in his 50s and 60s, he had a flat stomach. So he didn't have that desi, big belly that uncles have nowadays. He was very fit until his old age. And that's just a miracle of the Prophet ﷺ. But despite his strength, he was the most gentle of people. And whoever saw him, they were like awe-stricken with how beautiful he was. Something interesting to note, last time we talked about Halima, and when she came and she got the Prophet ﷺ as a baby. When Halima came and she saw his face, she looked at his face and she could not take his eyes. She could not take her eyes off of him. His beauty captured her. That's how awe-inspiring, how radiant his face was. And it said that, it's as if time slowed down for her. She was looking at the face and everything faded away. Just the face of the Prophet ﷺ, his beauty was radiating and was capturing her. And there's also narrations about how people who met the Prophet ﷺ, they were put in awe by just looking at him, and they could not stare for so long. They had to lower their gaze because of how immense his beauty was. And so just talking about this beauty thing, I want to state something interesting. Let's go on a tangent here, okay? Bear with me. So there's a story in the Sirah where it's in the Quran as well, the changing of the Qibla. Maybe you guys have heard of this, but the reason why we pray towards Mecca nowadays and not towards Jerusalem, which was the previous point of prayer. So when the Prophet ﷺ was in Mecca, he was able to face the Kaaba and pray towards Jerusalem because it was in the same line, like distance-wise, geographically. And Bayt al-Maqdis, which is in Jerusalem, was the previous prayer destination. So when the Prophet ﷺ went to Medina, the distance of the cities and the geographical location was so that he could not face the Kaaba while facing Jerusalem. And remember about the Prophet ﷺ, he's devoted to God. He's in love with God. He's yearning for God throughout his life. And also he was extremely knowledgeable. So during the Isra al-Mi'raj, which is, we'll talk about that later, He literally went out of time and space, and he saw things that normal people don't see. He saw the seven heavens. He saw the throne of God. He saw the wonders of paradise and hell and all these different things that we're going to see in the afterlife. So he understands the importance of life, the importance of our time and our days, and he also understands the mercy and beauty of God. So this is the heart of the Prophet ﷺ. And as he's in Medina, he's praying towards Beit al-Maqdis, and the Jews basically ask him, they question him, they criticize him, like, oh, you're praying this way. Why are you praying this way? I thought, you have a different prayer system. Are you like, so that they're criticizing him. And even though the Prophet ﷺ longed for the Qibla to be the Kaaba, like his hometown, he didn't say anything through this criticism, and he continued to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which shows the commitment of a true servant of Allah. And at one point, this criticism, it kept going on, and he just turned his face up. He just looked up. He just turned his face up towards the sky, and Allah sends the ayah, قَدْ نَرَى تَقَلُّبَ وَجْهِكَ فِي السَّمَاءِ. Indeed, we saw your face turning towards the sky. That's it. That's all it took. Just his beautiful face to turn towards God, and Allah responds and fulfills his wish. And he brings the Kaaba, he brings the Qibla, the prayer direction, back to the Kaaba. And Allah says in this verse, so wherever you are, turn your faces towards Mecca. Just the beauty of the Prophet ﷺ caused this phenomenal event to occur. That's the description of our Prophet ﷺ. So just a lesson we learn from this, the same goes for us, The Prophet ﷺ, he obeyed Allah, and Allah knows our deepest desires and what we truly wish for. But until we don't get that, we have to stay patient through it. We have to continue to obey Allah, just like the Prophet ﷺ did. And so moving on, let's go back to the story of the pact of chivalry. The Prophet ﷺ, at this time, the Arabs, there was a kind of an idea of sacred months. So, how we have like holidays nowadays? They had this concept of sacred months. So these 4 months you could not fight in. So regardless of what happened, even if you were angry, frustrated that something happened, somebody took your money away or they stole from you, in these months you could not fight people. And so these months, it allowed for Hajj, it allowed for a safe pilgrimage, safe travel across the desert. And there's a story that comes out of this, is that there were 2 men, and these men were from powerful tribes in Arabia. And so one man, he notices this other man, he has some sort of special protection from a ruler that he was jealous of. I wanted that protection. Why did he get this protection? And so this guy goes out with this other guy, and he gets him drunk, and then he kills him because of his jealousy. And this act was very, very bad. It was highly treacherous. So what happened was, this guy, he escapes and he takes refuge in a really big fort. And the tribe of the person that was killed, of course, they want retribution. They want justice to be done. And so these tribes, they're not part of Quraysh. Quraysh is the large tribe that's consolidated in Mecca. And these tribes were outside, but they were still in Arabia. Quraysh was allied with the tribe of the person that did the treachery. So the person that killed the other man from the other tribe, the Quraysh, the kind of the hometown of the Prophet ﷺ, they were allied with the person that did wrong. And this is important, because regardless of the fact that this person did wrong or right, the honor and the alliance that the Quraysh had kind of took precedence. So they had to defend, their man, regardless of what was right and what was wrong. And so out of this comes the war of treachery, Harb al-Fijar, the war of treachery. So in a sacred month, this man was treacherous. He killed a person. And so this conflict arises. 2 kind of groups are butting heads. This one wants this one wants revenge, and they want the right thing to be done, and this one is defending their allies. So this conflict, the war of treachery, Harb al-Fijar, it goes on for about 3 to 4 years. However, there's only about 5 days of actual fighting. So it's stretching. This conflict, this stress is going on, and there's only 5 days of actual fighting. And so think about it like this: you guys ever make plans with your friends, and then it starts raining, or somebody texts in the group chat, "Oh, I forgot to start my 5-page essay that is due tomorrow, that I was supposed to start 2 weeks ago." That's me right here. And then the plan's called off, right? Or, another example, you want to play Xbox with your friend, and then all of a sudden he tells you, "Oh, listen, I can't go on the Xbox because I'm over my screen time limit. I've played too much video games today," and so the plan is off, right? And the Arabs were like that. So if the weather was bad and it was raining, or I don't know how long it would rain in the desert, but if there was something going on and there's just a small problem, they would call it off. The fighting was off. And so that's why, it kept going on for years and years on end. And during this time, the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't fight, but he collected arrows for the tribes, his team basically. And one time he was allowed to shoot arrows, and he was really praised for his valor, his courage. So, and this war continues on, and as the conflict ends, people realize in Arabia that we don't have a system of law and justice in this city, and their sense of justice, because Quraysh was all about like upholding honor, justice, upholding truth. So the fact that they didn't have the system of justice kind of, it concerned them a bit. People were eager to establish some sort of system. So interestingly, right after this war ends, of course, another thing happens, right? Just as you feel like, you're getting into life and something good happens to you, all of a sudden another problem arises. So this problem was, there was a merchant, and he came over to Mecca to sell some of his goods, and a person from the Quraysh, he basically takes these goods and he says, "No, I'm not going to pay. I don't want to pay for these things. I'm just going to take them." And so this merchant feels wronged, obviously, right? Like, the guy just literally stole from me. So he gets up and he pleads his case in a very eloquent manner. And he says, like, "Listen, I've been wronged here. Is there anybody in this city that has a sense of justice?" And that really hit the Quraysh on the spot. And so all the tribes come together and they meet, and they basically make a pact, and they try to deal with the situation. So this is the pact of chivalry. This is the actual event that's going on. Hilf al-Fudul, pact of chivalry. So the tribes, all the different tribes in Quraysh, they come together, they meet, and basically what they say is that they're going to make a pact, and they say, regardless of who the ally is, regardless of the tribes, if there is an oppressed person, then we're going to side with the oppressor, and we're going to make sure that the right thing happens. We're going to enact justice. So regardless of allies, we're going to vow to each other, basically like actually they physically vowed. And they said that whatever happens, if there is a wrong done, we're going to address the wrong, and we're going to side with the oppressed, not the oppressor. And this is very important, because that establishment of this system of justice, it overcomes the previous tribal alliance they had. So now they're using morals and manners, justice, over alliances. And this is kind of a huge deal. And so this pact happens: protect the weak, enact justice, help the oppressed regardless of tribe, right? So protecting the weak. And later on, there was a narration, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that he was present during this pact of chivalry. And what he said here was, he was present in the house that pact took place. And if he was told to uphold that pact, even during the days of Islam, so this was before Islam, right? When Prophet ﷺ was very young. If he's told to uphold that pact now, during Islam, he would still do it, because of how just how excellent that pact was, how morally high of a pact it was. So this is an important lesson. This is an important event in the Prophet Prophet's life. And it's one of the last events that we'll talk about before we go on to the adult life of the Prophet. So this is where we'll stop here. We're basically exiting the early life. And now we're moving on to when the Prophet was an adult. So 25 years old, he's going to move on to becoming an actual merchant. So he's going to get a job and he's going to get married as well. And this is where his adult life starts. So this is where it gets really, really interesting. All right. So that's where we'll stop today. As just a closing exercise before we get to questions, I want you guys to go back and just discuss again with one person. Let's end it off with this. Discuss with the person next to you. Try to figure out one lesson and one main point that you want to remember from this class. So even if you don't remember the details, you don't remember, the uncles of the Prophet ﷺ and how they train archery and all this different stuff. Just remember one person, one lesson, and one main point that you want. Like for example, one lesson that I remember is we've got to trust in Allah, because even if I want something, like the change in the Qibla where the Prophet ﷺ wanted to, pray towards Mecca, but he remained trustworthy. It says for about 16 months. That's how long he waited. And so for me, like the one lesson that I take is I just got to be patient. Things happen in life. You always feel difficulty. You're not always you're going to get what you want. And not always are things going to be very easy for you. But with hardship comes ease. So we have to stay patient. So that's one thing that I'm bringing out of this. So talk with your guys' classmates, whoever's next to you for 2 minutes. One lesson, one main point that you want to remember after this class. And then we'll come back for questions, inshallah. All right, go ahead.
That's coming with us. That's so Saturday, Sunday. I'm not being funny about the waters because they love waters and bananas. Yeah, that's why I was like, I'm not gonna say anything about that. And then I said Zoom link. I'll send it on whenever I get it.
For us, let's wrap up.
All right, guys, let's get back. Okay, Sakina, you know the drill. One random person from each side.
Okay, does anyone want to volunteer themselves?
Zara, Tariq,
Zara.
okay, let's go.
So we talked about story of the elephant having faith in Allah and how Abdul Muttalib had, even though like he was facing this army of elephants, he still knew that Allah would protect the family. And we can apply that in our everyday life. Like even if we're faced with challenges, remember that we have Allah and if we make dua, He will listen to you. So having that faith is important.
MashaAllah. Very, very good. That's right. And there's one Quran ayah that I always think about on the same topic, like adding on from what you said, is that Allah says that, whoever calls upon me, I am near. So whoever basically makes dua, Allah will respond to you. He's listening. He's as-Sami'. He's the all-hearer. So he's there. Allah is with us. And that gives you a lot of hope, All right, let's move on to the next person.
Any boys want to volunteer themselves before I pick someone randomly? Let's pick someone different.
Once, yeah.
Yeah, you did it in the beginning. Any guys want to take one for the team?
I think Hassan wants to, right? Hassan?
Hassan, yeah. Our
Yeah.
crowd. Hassan, you Hassan.
Oh, okay. I learned that you gotta trust in Allah because if you trust Him, then He will get you what you need. Because kind of like with that same story, Abdul Muttalib, he made the dua to Allah and then also and then the elephants didn't do anything to the Kaaba.
That's right. Yeah, it's a good point. And sometimes if your dua is not, in the tradition, it's said that if your dua is not immediately accepted, then so it's either accepted immediately, or something that might have happened to you bad, like a calamity, it's taken away from you, or the best one is Allah saves that dua for you in the akhirah. So you don't get it immediately, but you'll get something way better in the next life, which I thought is pretty cool. So guys, make a lot of dua, right? It's gonna be accepted. So Jazakallah khair, guys. Thank you for your attention. You got through another lesson. We're 5 down. That's pretty good. All right.
Care for us. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other questions? You guys want to talk about something?
Yes, Abdullah has a question. Right, 2 questions.
We'll
Abdullah.
go. So we'll go with 3 questions total because I want to make sure that we don't go over time.
Okay, go ahead, Abdullah.
Yes, you said that like still uphold it in like modern Islam ages. I was wondering.
Abdullah, I can't hear.
Gotta speak up.
The pact, right? He's talking about the pact. Go ahead.
Okay.
On the front, yeah, that's easier.
So yeah,
Okay.
you said that the pact was like the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would still uphold it in modern ages. So, like, do you know, was it not like in effect when he like started the spread of Islam, or like why was it taken away?
Interesting. I don't know whether it was taken away or not. I think the hadith that I read was basically, it was saying that if I was called to uphold it, then like probably potentially like I would still uphold it, because the lesson that he's trying to teach us in this is just the moral value, how excellent in character, how excellent in upholding virtue this pact was, because it defended the weak, which is in Islam, that's like a large principle, very important thing that we strive to uphold, doing justice. So perhaps I'm not sure exactly why or how it was taken away. Maybe it's because it was like the tribal alliance. So yeah, but I'm not sure. Maybe I can check into that and let you know, inshallah.
So I know you said that they shifted the direction back, well, to the Kaaba, but I didn't catch where you said it was previously.
Jerusalem.
Okay. Yeah, so previously they prayed to Jerusalem. So Bayt al-Maqdis, Masjid al-Aqsa, right? It's the place in Jerusalem where, and previously most of the prophets, especially like in the Quran, we see all these different stories about Bani Israel, Prophet Musa, prophets, Harun, even all these different prophets sent to the Israelites. So the people that were in around that time in Jerusalem, in this area, and they were praying towards this place. And most of the prophets were connected with this area. So it's like a tradition, that's where the previous position of prayer was.
One.
I mean, my question was kind of similar to that one. So it was kind of 2-part. Like, so was Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam ordered to pray towards Jerusalem place? And then if so, like, kind of, I guess you kind of went over like what was the importance of the city, or like what was the importance of Jerusalem itself?
Yeah. So let's go with the second one. Jerusalem, it's one of the 3. So we have basically 3 holy sites. So the Prophet ﷺ said that if you're going to visit a masjid, visit Mecca, visit Medina, or visit Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem. And this was a place of all the previous prophets before Prophet ﷺ. There's only 4 really Arab prophets. Most of the prophets were sent in this general area with Bani Israel. If we look at the lineage of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, we have the lineage of Ismail, and we have the lineage of Ishaq. From Ishaq, we get Ishaq, Prophet Yaqub, and then the sons of Yaqub, Bani Israel. That's where it comes from. Those are the 12 tribes. So that's the lineage. And then the Arab prophets are only 4 in number, and one of them is the Prophet ﷺ. So we have these 2 branches. And so Jerusalem was a very holy city. It's in our tradition as well, because we obviously hold these different prophets in high regard, and we believe that they're prophets as well. So Jerusalem was their kind of holy city, and that's why it's another holy city for us. And interestingly, in Isra al-Mi'raj, which we'll talk about soon, inshallah, the Prophet ﷺ, he was taken to Jerusalem, and he led all the prophets in prayer at Masjid al-Aqsa, which is another reason why it's such a holy place for us. So this is probably the reason, just going with previous tradition or previous prophets, and not to show like Jews and Christians that Islam is a completely different religion. We uphold the same prophets. We believe in that the same books, the Torah, the Injil, they were revealed by God as well. And those are the books that the Christians and Jews use, of course, right? So just to show them that Islam is not an entirely different new religion. We have the same God, the same message, and we even pray in the same direction because this is a holy site for us as well. Just later on, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet that we're gonna change the direction of prayer to the Kaaba. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
We'll take one more question for us. Sabir.
Okay, sure.
Does the whole bird thing on the elephants basic question? You know, like how in Surah Fil that the birds were throwing the rocks on the elephants.
Right.
Does it basically count as the first airstrike?
Does that count like a first airstrike? Yes, it does.
If you want it to be, then we'll count it as the first airstrike. That's a very epic airstrike. You know, an airstrike from God. I don't know. Would you have to get like you guys play Call of Duty? 30 kill streak? Is that how you get that airstrike? You probably need to get 100 to get God's airstrike.
All right, for us, one last question. Abdullah, go ahead.
I have another one. So I know you mentioned in the prophet of treachery. So I was wondering, like, what exactly was his involvement? I feel like sometimes people say, like, because he's involved in this war, that like he was strong, like maybe like prophet was like violent and stuff, and they use like that. So I was wondering, like, what exactly did he do in the war? Like, that's something I can't talk about.
Did you get the question?
So let me just repeat it. So what you're saying is, what was the Prophet's role in this act of treachery, right? Like, was like because people use it to kind of I guess debase the Prophet? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like specifically the war where he said like he helped out and stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So we can say that the Prophet's involvement, the reason behind it was for upholding moral virtue and honor. So it was not that the fact that he actually didn't even fight, really. He was not allowed to fight. He was just, picking up arrows and going along with what he was, because at that time he was only 12 years old. So I don't know if it's a correct argument to say that, oh, this guy was treacherous because he was involved in defending this person that was a murderer. Not necessarily. The civilization at that time was different. The tribal laws, basically that's how the city worked. That's how people stayed intact together, was through tribal alliances. So upholding the honor of your tribe's alliance, of your family, was a good thing. And the fact that he didn't even fight, he is just collecting arrows, and he was very young at this time. So we can't rightfully say that the Prophet was treacherous. And if this is the only evidence that person whoever's, whatever argument they pose, then look at all the other evidence, look at all the other stories around this. Don't just pinpoint one story and say the Prophet was involved in this and therefore, he's done a bad thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally washed his heart and took out all impurities, just made it so completely pure right from the start, 4 years old. So, and look at his character, look at his description, look at how beautiful he was, inward and outward, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there's going to be people that try to, debase the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but we know, and our faith is strong in the fact that he was the best of creation, with the best character and the best outward appearance.
All right. I think that's it for today. Jazakallah khair for us. We'll stop the recording now.
All right.
It's like a circle.